So this is the race reaction for the Dutch Grand Prix 2021. And you know what? I thought it was a very good race. It was certainly on the interesting side. We didn't get tons of on-track action. There was a little bit of on-track action, and there was a very, very intriguing pit strategy between Red Bull and Mercedes. As always, whenever they are racing each other, the strategy becomes very important because they are so close to each other on track. Let's kick off things then with the quali session. Qualifying, okay, so firstly, Max Verstappen did qualify on pole position, as you can see. Those of you watching on YouTube, you will see we have the starting grid on the screen. Those of you listening in our podcast, I'll do my best to try and describe everything that's going on here. So Verstappen, of course, qualified on pole position. But unfortunately for him, we had both of the Mercedes then second and third. So Hamilton was in second and Bottas was in third place. Where was Sergio Perez? Oh, no sign of Sergio Perez, unfortunately. So Perez had disappeared off the scene. So he was all the way back in, let's see, where was Perez? 16th place is where he was starting. He had a very poor qualifying session. He went out in Q1. Of course, there were a few mitigating circumstances. It didn't work out for them. They should have sent him out a little bit sooner. But, you know, these are the conditions that everybody is up against. Vettel also found himself caught out. He finished in 17th place, or at least he was starting the race in 17th place. So this is very poor from Perez. Not only was he not there to support his teammate then in the battle with Mercedes and in the Constructors' Championship, but this was also the home Grand Prix for Max Verstappen. And as you can imagine, very, very important for Max. A lot of pressure on him to get this win. The Dutch Grand Prix is only in place because of Max Verstappen. I think you go back to 1985, potentially, before you get the last Dutch Grand Prix that took place. So quite a gap of time. Of course, we were supposed to have the Dutch Grand Prix last year, but it got cancelled due to COVID, like many other races. So yeah, you have to start thinking about Perez then. This is super ironic in my opinion. So the timing of this comes just after the Belgian Grand Prix. So prior to the Belgian Grand Prix, and we've done a separate podcast and video on this, you can find it on YouTube and on your podcast store. Prior to the Belgian Grand Prix, Red Bull announced that they have signed Sergio Perez for the 2022 season. So they've continued his contract. In my conversation on this, I made the argument that, look, it makes a lot of sense to keep your same driver to have a little bit of continuity. Red Bull don't seem to give the second driver much of a chance these days. So this is a little bit of a change from the normal. And, you know, having that continuity going into the 2022 car, especially with the new regulations and the background development that's happening, that could certainly stand to them. However, in saying that, Gasly does have the experience of driving a Honda engine car, and we can see he's been doing quite well in that car. So it still confuses me slightly as to why they did do that. Now, Red Bull being Red Bull, of course, no driver is guaranteed for an entire season, even if they are signed up for 2022. It doesn't mean Perez is getting past race 3 or 4 of the season if he's really not performing. And, you know, typical Red Bull fashion, he could even not last to the end of the season. So it's definitely not a given, but it's contractually what they've signed up for, and that's where we are. So as I was saying, it's ironic. Perez wasn't able even to get to the starting grid last weekend at the Belgian Grand Prix after he had that accident on his way to the grid. Now, admittedly, it was very wet, but as I keep saying, these are the conditions that everybody has to go up against. The same for qualifying. Then on Saturday for the Dutch Grand Prix, he was not able to get out of Q1. He was not able to support his team. He's not able to support his teammate. So it's really not good enough from Sergio Perez. But we'll talk a little bit about Perez, while We also had a very strong qualifying session from Pierre Gasly and Antonio Giovinazzi. Once again, I would say the optics of this are very interesting. So no sooner have Red Bull announced that they're signing Perez for next season, and Gasly comes out with this qualifying performance. And to be honest, the AlphaTauri really has no place in the top 5, the top 10. Well, probably yes in the top 10, but Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes, Red Bull, AlphaTauri, are they really in that mix? So to qualify in 4th place was such a fantastic and yet it was a consistent qualifying performance from Gasly, because he has been qualifying very well all season, and he has been doing very well all season, finishing in the points for many of the races. Giovinazzi as well. So Kimi Räikkönen is out the door. Giovinazzi, I don't know, is he staying or not? Well, he's been told he has X amount of races to save his career in Formula 1 or within the, not AlphaTauri, I'll do this, Alfa Romeo, within the Alfa Romeo team. He qualified in 7th, and he was very strong in many of the practice sessions as well, so he looked very good. There was big disappointment then for Lando Norris, of course. Lando Norris was only able to manage 13th place in qualifying, and he was out-qualified by his teammate. And this time it was legitimate. It wasn't like Belgium last weekend where Norris had that big accident in Q3 and actually couldn't qualify the car above 10th place. Of course, he did take penalties and everything else associated with that crash for the replacement of engine parts. Then we have Hamilton. He just didn't seem to have the speed of Max Verstappen, so he had to settle for 2nd place. He did beat his teammate. Bottas looked quite fast through the practice session, so it was there or thereabouts between Bottas and Hamilton. But yeah, he was able to do that, so that was good news for Hamilton. What was interesting, though, of course, and maybe I can bring up the times here if I have them. Oh, I don't have them. What a surprise! So, but looking at the gaps, and you're talking about 1/100ths of a second between Hamilton and Verstappen. But Verstappen actually had a DRS failure on his fastest lap, which was interesting. So potentially we're talking about, I'm not sure exactly how much DRS is worth, but I would imagine it's anywhere up to 0.3 of a second. So that could have been a much bigger gap that he had. Anyway, ifs and buts, it doesn't overly matter. Max Verstappen did get pole position, and he started on pole position today. So that brings us straight up to the race itself. And speaking of the race, so very good start for Max Verstappen. It was all about, getting a good start, and then really you were thinking that this race is going to come down to the pit strategy. And I would have to agree with that, I guess. I would have to agree with that. Yes, it was all about the pit strategy, because the Dutch Grand Prix, the circuit, it's very tight, it's very winding, it goes from left to right, lots of sweeping corners, not a lot of really great overtaking opportunities, even with DRS enabled on the start-finish straight, not as convincing as, let's say, Portimao, where it was like a slam dunk with the DRS, and it was actually, I thought it made the racing a little bit boring in that regard. So yes, I didn't think there were going to be a lot of overtaking opportunities today during the race. I was worried that the race was going to be a procession, was going to be quite boring. In the end, okay, look, there wasn't an awful lot of on-track action or on-track overtaking. There were some, of course, not counting overtaking of back markers. And that was fine, and that was good, but it was really the pit strategy. This was the most intriguing part, and boy, you could not call this pit strategy, let me tell you that much. So we had the predictions from Pirelli just prior to the race itself, and Pirelli were saying they thought the quickest strategy would be if you started on the soft tires, which the majority of the top 10, I think everybody in the top 10 was starting on the soft tire, because of course they set their fastest time on the soft tire in Q2. So they were starting on the soft tire, then they were predicting anywhere between lap 25 and lap 30 that you would make the switch to the hard tire, and that would be it, one stopper to the end of the race. Alternatively, if you were starting on the medium tire, you could go a little bit further into the race, and we did actually see this because Lando Norris did this. He started on the yellow medium tire, They were predicting between lap 27 and 32 to make the stop. And actually, as it turned out for Lando Norris, he pitted on lap 35, if I remember correctly. So quite close to that. And then the alternative was starting on the red soft tyre, then around lap 18 to lap 24, pitting then for medium tyres, going all the way through to 45 to 55, somewhere in that region of laps. 72 lap race, of course. And then pitting again for the soft tyres to finish the race. So I had mentally set myself up for this, I would say, and actually what transpired was actually something completely different altogether. So in the end, what we got was Mercedes decided they needed to try something to get past Red Bull. And you can't blame them for that. They really were up against it. Lewis Hamilton wasn't able to get not too much closer than 2 seconds to Max Verstappen, at least initially in the first stint. So it was Hamilton who pitted first in the pit stop battle with Red Bull. They obviously tried everything to get the undercut on Red Bull. It just didn't work out for them. He pitted first. He put on the medium tyres. Max Verstappen responded and did the exact same thing, putting on the yellow medium tyres as well. Hamilton was on the radio almost immediately complaining, oh, these tyres aren't going to last, this is the wrong strategy, this won't get us to the end of the race, I'm already starting to feel the wear. He did set the fastest lap immediately after saying that on one occasion as well. So this is the usual fun and games that Lewis Hamilton gets up to. But Mercedes were thinking very hard about this. What can they do to try and get past Verstappen? So they actually made an impromptu second pit stop very, very quickly after that. And they switched Hamilton onto, well, they didn't switch, but they kept him on another another set of medium tyres. Red Bull, what were Red Bull going to do? Well, Red Bull responded immediately on the next lap. They called in Max Verstappen. And this is where things got very, very interesting, because Lewis Hamilton did have one set of medium tyres left. Max Verstappen didn't. Max Verstappen only had a set of hard tyres. So Max had to switch onto the hard tyres to cover off what Hamilton was doing. And this is immediately where I was starting to think, okay, so Hamilton has a set of mediums that will hopefully get him to the end of the race, but you would expect degradation will probably kick in towards the end of the race. However, Max is on the hard tyres, which should be slower, potentially, theoretically, than the medium tyres that Hamilton has just put on, but they should last a lot longer into the race, and so he should be dealing with a much better situation with his tyres towards the end of the race. So in my mind, there was actually a scenario where Hamilton maybe would have more speed on the medium tyres, overtake Verstappen, and then Verstappen would overtake Hamilton towards the end of the race. Now, it wasn't as exciting as that, as it turns out. Hamilton did get mighty close to Verstappen. I think he did just about break the barrier of the DRS at one point, courtesy of some back markers. But then he started to fall away again and he just couldn't do it. And Hamilton, of course, being Hamilton, was back on the team radio saying the strategy was stupid, the tyres aren't going to last. We got a close-up shot of the tyres at one stage, and the front left really did look very blistered on the inside. So it was amazing. In the end, Hamilton did bolt on a set of soft tyres at the very, very end of the race. That was, of course, to get the fastest lap after Bottas had tried to steal that from him accidentally, of course. Okay, so those were the pit stops. Now, towards the end of the race, Valtteri Bottas did pit, and his tyres, he had a gap in the traffic, so he wasn't going to be overtaken from behind, and he was absolutely no threat to Lewis Hamilton ahead of him. So he took the tyres. He was going for he wasn't going for the fastest lap of the race, as it turns out. Mercedes told him not to go for the fastest lap. They said it was for precautionary reasons that they pitted him. So obviously there was some kind of niggling worry there about the tyres. That was interesting. I found that interesting, I have to say. Bottas tried his best not to set the fastest lap, or so he would have you believe. He set the fastest sector 1, the fastest sector 2. They got on the radio, they told him slow down for the third sector. You do not want to take the fastest lap away from Lewis Hamilton. Bottas did take the fastest lap from Lewis Hamilton. Even though he slowed down noticeably, he still got the fastest lap. This for me was a very interesting message that came through from Valtteri Bottas to the Mercedes team. You know, either he genuinely did make a mistake and just with the light fuel load and the fresh new soft tyres, he just couldn't help but go that fast, or Valtteri knows he's out the door at the end of the season and he doesn't really care for this anymore. He doesn't really care. This was his opportunity to score an additional point for himself. He has a battle in the championship as well. He's up against Lando Norris. He's trying to get third place back in the championship. I'm sure that's how he was looking at it to an extent as well. And he had already moved over earlier in the race to let Lewis Hamilton past him. Now, admittedly, they were on completely different pit strategies. But, it can't be all one-way traffic. Well, it kind of is, though, at Mercedes. That's a small bit of the problem that he's having. Now, before I look at the results, I should actually finish off that story. I'm sure any of you that were watching the race saw this as well. Hamilton then had to pit on, I think it was like the second last lap for fresh rubber himself. He, of course, was in no danger. He wasn't catching Verstappen, and Bottas was way, way behind. So no problem whatsoever. He pitted and he did snatch back the fastest lap from Bottas. But, of course, I think the way Mercedes will look at this, he shouldn't have had to do that. And that's it. So fastest lap goes to Hamilton and he does get that one extra point, which could be critical when you look at how tight the championship is. Before we start looking at the results from the race, I will say that there was one interesting overtaking move during the race where it was Lando Norris versus Sergio Perez. So Perez tried to take Norris through the outside. It seemed to work. Then Norris had more speed into the corner. Obviously, he had the inside line. He got his car, let's say, halfway ahead of Perez, and he closed the door. He essentially tried to push Perez off the track. He didn't leave a car's width. There was contact between both of the cars, and there was some minor damage to Sergio Perez's car as a result of that. Now, Perez did manage to get the move done, and he did manage to get past, because I think Norris actually managed to scrub off a little bit of speed in the overall incident itself. There was no penalty handed to Norris for this, and it really does make you wonder. Obviously, a slightly different setup with the race stewards and everything at different circuits each weekend, but if that was the British Grand Prix and you're to apply the same rule from the British Grand Prix, then theoretically Norris probably should have had a penalty because he didn't leave a car's width. But yeah, once again, I don't know. But there certainly is a lack of consistency from weekend to weekend as to how the rules are applied. It actually could have been absolutely critical for Norris, because he did end up in the points in the end, just about. And if he hadn't ended up in the points, it would have been his teammate who would have gotten that one solitary point in the end. All right, let's look at the results from the race. First up, we have, of course, Max Verstappen, who won the race. Next, we have Lewis Hamilton, who came in second place, as we know, and Valtteri Bottas came in third place. You can see on the screen at the moment, for those of you watching this on YouTube, so you can see that there was a gap of 20.9 seconds between Verstappen and Hamilton. That actually isn't representative of the real gap that was there. That was just because Hamilton pitted for the soft tyres at the very end of the race. In fourth place, we had Pierre Gasly. Fifth place, we had Charles Leclerc. In sixth place was Alonso. Alonso did very well to get past Carlos Sainz, who was in seventh place just towards the end of the race. Next up then, in eighth place, we had Sergio Perez. We had Ocon in ninth, and then rounding out the points, we had Lando Norris in 10th place. And in 11th, agonizingly, in 11th was Daniel Ricciardo. And it just didn't work out for Daniel Ricciardo today. I thought this was the race. He obviously was qualified ahead of his teammate. And he had the soft hard tire combination, whereas Norris had the medium hard tire combination for the race, because he started outside of the top 10 and he had a free choice on the tire he wanted to start with. He ran long into the race until lap 35 before he made his pit stop. Just didn't work out for Ricciardo though. Norris overtook him on the track, and that was that. So this must be, well, it must be a double blow for Ricciardo, being beaten by his teammate. Yes, that's really bad for him, but also the fact that he didn't get any points. He didn't get any points. It was Norris in 10th place who got 1 point, and Ricciardo in 11th with 0 points. Then rounding out the rest of the race, we had Stroll in 12th place, Vettel in 13th, Giovinazzi ended up in 14th place, Kubica back in Formula 1, replacing Kimi Raikkonen for this weekend, was in 15th, Latifi was in 16th, Russell 17th, and Mick Schumacher was in 18th place. Tsunoda and Mazepin had issues with their cars and were retired from the race during the race. So they didn't classify in the end. All right, so what do I need to call out here, or who do I need to call out here? Definitely Gasly. Gasly was fantastic. He was not troubled at all today by the Ferraris. He wasn't in the mix with the Mercedes cars either. However, he had a very, very solid race. He had a very solid weekend. Qualified well in fourth, finished well in fourth. Very impressive. You couldn't actually ask for much more from him, given that the Red Bull and both of the Mercedes were in the race and racing to full capacity. He did finish ahead of Perez as well, if you want to look at it that way. So that was very good from Gasly. Alonso, as I mentioned, he did get past Sainz in the end of the race, and that gave him a critical 6th place. And the reason I say this is critical, because I think this actually puts Alonso ahead of Ocon in the driver standings, even though Ocon did win the Hungarian Grand Prix. So amazingly consistent from Alonso that he gets himself in the points now for a lot of races in a row, and he's able to build a championship, well, I won't say a championship lead, but a championship standing that puts him within the top 10 and pushes his teammate out. We've mentioned Ricciardo, also Kubica coming in at very short notice. I think he did quite well. He finished in 15th, so obviously he finished ahead of both of the Williams cars. He finished in front of the Haas as well of Mick Schumacher. And you know, just 1 place behind his teammate. Now there was quite a gap between him and his teammate, but that was a good performance from Kubica. And afterwards, actually, he was interviewed and he said that it was so good to race in a real Formula 1 car, and it's the first time he's raced in a real Formula 1 car since his accident, because Williams wasn't a real Formula 1 car, or at least it wasn't up to the speed that it should have been, and that was interesting. Clearly no love lost there with the Williams team. So, interesting words from Kubica. If you are watching on YouTube, please don't forget to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button as well. We really appreciate your support. And what else was I going to say? Oh yes, don't forget to hit the bell to be notified of new videos. Speak to you soon.